and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. Start tonight's meeting and ask if anybody from the board has any public comment this evening.
Oh, just that the Lions Club pancake breakfast is tomorrow morning at the Senior Citizens House from 8 till 11.
Thank you. Anything else? So one announcement, the Boys and Girls Club want to announce that their third annual Are You Smarter Than Our Sixth Graders game show fundraiser will be held Friday, February 27th in the Lunenburg High School auditorium. You can watch as teams of adults compete against each other with the help from our sixth graders in traditional academic trivia. Will the Red Hats come back to defend their title, or will the library team return to declare victory? Which team will be crowned champion, and do you want to play? If you would like to be a sponsor or support this event, as well as attend, we have several opportunities for you to help. There are sponsors of the event, there are sponsors for teams, categories around, sponsors for sixth graders, and sponsors for questions. All that can be seen if you are interested by going to the club's website at www.bgcl.Club of Lunenburg. So bgcluboflunenburg.org. And they're looking for teams as well. So if you have a group of 3 to 5 people and you're interested in supporting the Boys and Girls Club, it's a fun time. I will be emceeing once again this year, so that's always fun. And I've been asked by the Boys and Girls Club if the Board of Selectmen would think about fielding a team. So you've now officially been served.
Post an agenda.
As long as we're not deliberating towards an answer.
Yeah. So I will announce that throughout the weeks as that event comes closer. Any public comment from the public this evening? Seeing none, go right to our agenda. And we have, do you have any preference which one we do first? With the people in the audience? Let's do.
Just, if you would take the first one.
Okay, the first one. Approve the sale of $20,605,000 in general obligation bonds for the school construction project. And I will hand this over to the town manager.
And I would like to introduce David Eisenthal, who is our financial advisor from Unibank Fiscal Advisory Services, who will present the item for you.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As Ms. Spidel said, I'm appearing this evening to request that the board vote to approve the sale of $20,605,000 par amount of school bonds to provide additional local share funding for the middle high school construction project and to execute various associated documents, which should be at the table now. As you'll recall, the town sold $9 million worth of bonds about 2 or 3 months ago, and I appeared before you in early November to make a similar request to approve the sale of the $9 million issue and to execute documents, and then to discuss options for the subsequent financing of the school project. The $9 million that was sold in October, November provided enough financing to cover temporary financing up to that point and a little bit into this calendar year, but it was clear that a substantially higher amount of financing was going to be needed early this calendar year. And at that point, the board indicated support for a large issue early in calendar 2015. In fact, we couldn't have gotten much earlier. The bids were taken on Wednesday, January 7th. The amount that we selected was based on a revised cash flow provided by Jocelyn Lesser, the owner's project manager for the project. And I'll note that as part of the process, Town Manager Spidel conducted a conference call with Standard & Poor's, and this resulted in the same rating as the town has had recently, the AA+, which is one level below the highest rating of AAA. As I mentioned, the town took bids on Wednesday, January 7th, received 6 bids ranging from 3.337% to 3.625%, with the low bid being made by Hutchinson, Shockey, Early and Company of Chicago. I think at this point I'll just see if, through the chair, if there are any questions about the issue or...
So pursuant to that conversation that you referred to at your previous meeting when we borrowed for the 9 million, bonded the 9 million, this is the bulk share, except for some minimal number that would be left for, some variation in the project.
Well, this was really to provide about a year's worth of cash flow for the project. At this point, it would appear, our estimate at this point is that there will be about another $8.5 million, assuming that the project comes in right on or around budget, and that the Mass School Building Authority it pays the estimated maximum grant. We're looking at a figure of about $8.5 million, probably about a year from now, to finish out the project. And I actually have, I'll ask if you want me to hand these out. Let's see if I have. Maybe a couple more. This is an update of the expected costs. What's called the column that's called, you see the column below it's called, you see fiscal year, and then to the right of that is ban interest. Those are actually all costs that the town has incurred to now. The total outstanding, those are the costs of the 9 million and the 20,605,000. The next 3 columns show an estimate of what the 8.5 million next year will look like, with the grand total showing the sum of all of the financings. We've actually, since it's my understanding that the feasibility study will not be funded on the tax rate, but rather in the town's budget, we netted out the feasibility study debt service to produce what the net cost of the tax rate will be. And it is, I believe, a little lower than what we had been projecting. We were looking at about, I think previously we were looking at something pretty close to a $2 a year impact on the tax rate. At this point, we're looking at about $1.84, which is about $450 on the average single-family house in Lunenburg. But this again assumes that the town issues $8.5 million in a year at a substantially higher interest rate than what we're looking at now. So you could actually, if you borrow less or if interest rates are better, the impact could be less.
Well, what are you estimating that additional 8 million will be?
What am I
estimating that the percentage is going to be of the 8 million?
4.5%.
Okay. Now, we talked about, the reason I bring up my question is because I thought we talked about at that meeting that we would come as close as we would think prudent, because we didn't want to obviously overborrow. But I thought we were going to leave a lot less than they were going to borrow while the rates were good. We were going to borrow as much as we could at that rate. That was the big discussion that time.
The issue here is that when you start looking at the amounts that if the MSBA funds more contingencies than we expect, this number could go down. It could be less than the $8.5 million if the project budget, if the actual cost of the project comes in less than expected. This could have an effect on the expected financing. So this is just to give you an idea of what sort of the likely worst case scenario is.
I was under the impression we were going to get closer to only leaving like 3 million for next year and get as best rate as we can right now, since we know what the rate is.
Well, I think that this is again, this is a likely worst-case scenario. It's possible that there would be less. You don't want to overborrow. That introduces a series of problems. So this is the reason that we selected the.
Well, we're not going to shave 8 million off this project. So I think the chance of us.
No, but
that's what I'm saying. I thought if we left 3 million, that gives us enough flexibility to say, okay, if things go down or whatever. But that was my impression, at least. And I'm saying that partially because of the discussion that evening, and partially on behalf of the resident who brought it forward, to be fair to his argument at the time. So
right. I mean, still, the town has done nearly $30 million here, and so the bulk, more than 3/4 of the local share financing in the worst case scenario, and possibly a higher percentage than that, has been done, and at both in the low 3%, 3.3% range. So I think that this financing accomplishes that.
Okay. I'll open it up to the board if anybody has any questions.
No questions from me?
Nope.
Okay, then
Ready for the motion?
you have the approved motion.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve and confirm the sale of $20,605,000 in general obligation school bonds at the price of $20,744,962.05 to Hutchinson, Shockey, Early and Company under the terms and conditions contained within the specimen vote of the Board of Selectmen, which shall appear in its entirety in the minutes of this board meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Spidel, as temporary treasurer, will sign where the light green stickers appear. Members of the board will sign where the yellow appears, and then there are stickers for the seal. The clerk of the board will sign where you see the light blue sticker, and then the town clerk, where you see the square yellow, that's the town clerk's signature.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Are you taking these back tonight, or do you want me to send them tomorrow?
If the town clerk is available,
Oh, that's right, no.
so we can talk about what.
I will send them back to you tomorrow, then.
Okay.
There are 4 copies, is that correct?
There should be 4 copies of most of the documents. Mr. Chairman, I will just make one more set of remarks on the use of premium. I think that the part of the discussion in November regarded the use of premium, which is the amount that is bid above and beyond the par amount of the bond issue, that any amount of premium that would be in excess of what would be needed to pay for costs of issuance would be voted by town meeting in the spring toward the project. And I'll be working with the town manager and the town accountant to determine exactly how much those amounts are, but it is my understanding that the board supports that effort.
Yes, we discussed that at that meeting too, yes.
Mr. Chairman, any other questions, or?
Anybody have any further questions? No? Thank you very much.
Do you want me to?
You're killing me. Don't we have you want to to keep signing them, or we want
So
to?
4 places on this one, right?
Let's hold off so we can get to the next one. Okay, so Mr. Proctor doesn't have to watch us sign a million documents. We'll take the request to accept the road layout of Whitetail Crossing. Good evening.
Good evening. Dan Proctor, Mass Ave, Lunenburg. I'm here to see if the selectmen will accept the road as laid out, as proposed, I guess, is the way I'm supposed to present it.
Right, so the item before you this evening is to consider accepting, or adopting, actually, is adopting the layout of the road in accordance with the requirements under Mass General Law. You were first presented with this request back in December, I believe December 9th. You voted to set tonight as the hearing date and to refer this to the Planning Board for their report that is required under Mass General Law. The Planning Board has reviewed this request and has provided their report, which is in your packet this evening. The Land Use Director is here this evening, and I think it would be a good idea to have him just walk through what the Planning Board's report contains, and then if there are any questions for either him or Mr. Proctor, those could be taken up after.
Excellent. So,
Good evening, all. Adam Burney, Land Use Director, for those watching at home. The Planning Board, at their December 22nd meeting, excuse me, discussed the items remaining out at Whitetail. There's two, what I'll call minor items. There's a driveway apron that is within the right-of-way and could potentially, in the long term, cause a problem with the roadway. In speaking with Mr. Proctor, the homeowner at that location is in the process of paving their driveway, and rather than
location is that, do you know?
it is Lot 2.
And, excuse me, that has actually been done now.
It has been. I hadn't been out there.
That is done.
But they were going to pour the driveway and the apron at the same time, so they got a nice seamless driveway. And the other is some loam and seed that is to be done on the Burge and Whitetail area, where some grubbing was done. Being that it's December and it's 10 degrees outside, loaming and or it's January now, but loaming and seeding isn't a feasible thing to do. The planning board will be the supporting party for the article. So should that not be done, should it not not be completed, they would have the opportunity to withdraw the article at town meeting or ask for an indefinite continuance or pass over, however, the language, whatever language you want to happen to use. Other than that, the board feels that the project has been completed to their satisfaction. All bonds and covenants and surety has been released to Mr. Proctor or his partner, whomever had put them up at the time. And we do have the letter from the engineer stating that everything is in accordance with the original approval with the two outstanding items that were already mentioned, which now remains to be one outstanding item.
Excellent. I'm sure that will not be an issue come the spring.
No, again, I think that that's really what it is it's a timing issue.
And the DPW director has obviously seen this too. And
He reviewed the report from the planning board and is in concurrence with the two items that they mentioned, that those are outstanding or one and need to be taken care of.
anybody from the board have any questions for Mr. Burney or Mr. Proctor?
The only
Town manager.
The only question I have is the proposed deed for after town meeting, assuming town meeting accepts it, of whether town council has reviewed that deed for compliance with whatever we have to do.
It has not yet been sent to town council. If you approve this tonight, the next step would be for me to draw up the order for you to sign, which includes the deed. And at that point, I would send it to town council, so he or she, whoever's reviewing it, has plenty of time to do before town meeting.
That being said, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a good project that's gone through all the required process through the planning board.
I agree. Anybody else? Then I will entertain a motion on the acceptance of the road layout of Whitetail Crossing as presented and reviewed by the planning board with the contingencies noted by the planning board.
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. You made it.
Any chance I can be Article number 1?
There is a chance, but not a good chance. I'll promise not to make you article number, 20.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, well, while Mr. Bernie's in the front row here, we should review the earth removal bylaw and gravel permit process. I should say the star item on our agenda tonight.
I always was told I'd be a star.
There you go. Whoever told you
I
that
don't
was
know
right.
if this is what they meant, but
You're not the Big Dipper.
so as far as process goes, I didn't review what process the board is currently using because I think that some of the things that I suggest in the bylaw may alter that process. And so rather than put effort into, working to correct a process, I'd rather look at the bylaw and then sort of ferret the process out from there. And I think that the first comment I have on the document that I sent you, and again, this is sort of a working draft. I've kind of just been parsing about it. It certainly has work left to do, but it should at least facilitate a discussion, which was my understanding of our last conversation about this. Currently, the Board of Selectmen is the permit granting authority for earth removal and gravel permits. I guess in this day and age of multiple projects, specialized boards, I at least think it's worth a conversation as to whether or not a land use board would be a more appropriate place for this permit to reside, maybe for ease of permitting for projects, as well as to take some of the burden off of the Board of Selectmen who may not see land use and property development plans on a regular basis and may have a group of people who are new, are continuing to, but don't see the plans often and have I don't want to say a harder time, but you're trying to get your feet back under you every time one of these comes in front of you, where any of the land use boards is looking at these kind of things on a more regular basis. So that's kind of the impetus for not looking at the process of how they're being handled, and to sort of look at whether or not it's valuable to move this in that direction and let whichever board it happens to land with sort of look at their process for how they would fold this in. And I think also the fact that a lot of the projects that this is going to apply to will fall into some permitting category within the land use department. And so to roll the two applications into one hearing helps move a project along quicker, gives interested parties less meetings to try and attend and keep track of, and have comments consolidated to one or two specific areas. But, again, all for discussion purposes, and, I don't know how you want to sort of go from there, but if you want to run through all the red marks on the page, and I can sort of tell you what my thinking was. I'm not sure how much time you've had to review it, and whether or not you want to make comments or you want to have a more general discussion.
I think we've just received this.
Okay.
So let's keep it at a general discussion. But
Sure.
personally, I like your first point, which is it does make sense. I mean, I'm not one to be bound by, we've always done it that way, so that's the way we should keep doing it. But it does make sense in two regards. First of all, it is a land use, and so it seems to be fairly logical that it should be with a land use board. And secondly, one of the reasons why this is before us now is because of the subdivision rule that comes to the planning board that said you didn't need an earth removal permit. Well, if there is some even perceived disconnect between that or the need for one board, we didn't want an applicant to go between two boards, then giving this to the planning board seems to be a logical thing to do, especially since we've consolidated everything into a land use department. So
Sure.
from that perspective, I think that makes absolute sense, and I think that probably, for me, drives the conversation about how the bylaw should be, as you just said, how the process should be formulated. That's my opinion.
Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll run through, it's only about 6 pages long, so, and I would say 3 of those are red marks, but the first large portion is just sort of a definition download. The previous bylaw had 2 definitions in it. I think that in an effort to make clear what the expectations are and what is covered by this, just putting reasonable definitions of what we expect these words to mean makes sense. None of these are, I didn't sit down and write these. These are standard definitions that you see in a lot of different bylaws. It shouldn't be shocking to anybody if somebody feels that semantically there's words that they'd like to change. I'm not opposed to that, but this isn't a willy-nilly off the top of my head definition. These are standardized definitions. We'll come back to what you're seeing under number 6, because I think that's really where the heavy conversation happens. I'm going to need that. Number 7 is just sort of taking the application process, what the requirements are, adding a little bit of meat to it to try and get some more specific information that you see more often in gravel and earth removal permits. Erosion and sedimentation controls, the amount of fill to be removed, addresses and names of abutters from the recent tax list, the kind of things that you kind of want to know, location of any proposed stockpiles, natural features, wetlands, floodplains, etc. Now, currently it's just a permit. There's no definition to what kind of permit. A lot of places do it as a special permit through a general bylaw, which folds it into 40A, gives you a defined process, gives you time limits, all of that kind of stuff. That's honky-dory. It's great. But if you would like to keep it as just a permit, it's something that you can do. There's probably a less defined appellate process and some of the other things that go with that. So a lot of what I've started to do is shift it towards the special permit process. And again, that's a process that people are familiar with, that the land use boards do, at least planning and zoning do on a regular basis. So it's something that those members should be comfortable with as far as a process.
I'm going to ask you, okay, I'll let you present it, and then we can come back
Sure.
to it, I guess.
Also, a plan identifying the proposed route that hauling vehicles will take. I know that this can be problematic, especially when you get into some of the more rural areas, some of the smaller roads. Some of them probably aren't appropriate for larger vehicles. So if you're using a smaller dump truck, it's probably not a big deal. If you start bringing in the large articulated trucks, some of the smaller roads can be a problem, and that's something that should at least be identified. We outlined the special permit process a little bit, formalized some things that could be put into conditions. Some of it is just formatting, adding some language about the renewals, and this may be controversial, but I know that there's been some concern raised about indefinite renewals of inactive projects. And again, taking a stab at it, 2 months prior to expiration, the application needs to be made for a renewal so that someone doesn't come in and say, I know it ran out last month, but can I just renew it? It gives everybody sort of some time to think about it, and limiting the amount of renewals. I don't know if 2 or 3 would be something that someone would be willing to do as far as the renewal, and then they have to close it down if they're not going to use it. I think that gets away from some of these removal permits that may be open for multiple years and inactive, and maybe there's some inactivity language that could be added there, that kind of thing. And then I think 10 is probably the thing that we talked the most about the last time I was here, and that's taking some standards and placing them into the bylaw and applying them to all earth removal, not just those permits that require a special permit. So these would be standards that anyone who's removing earth beyond whatever cubic yards we decide is required to abide by. And, I don't think we're talking about anything crazy. Stuff, keeping it within a certain amount of feet from the road. Anything that is excavated has to be within further than 7 feet away from seasonal high groundwater, with provisions that special permits can allow for deviation from that because they can impose additional controls. So if you are doing it as part of a project but want to go further than 7 feet, you apply for the special permit, you get the conditions placed on that. This one might be a little bit more controversial. Topsoil and subsoil stripped need to remain on site to be reused. And that's something that a lot of communities do. Some don't. Some people don't like that. And part of the reason some people do earth removal is they take that stuff and they sell it elsewhere. But it may have an effect on that site. And you may want to look at keeping that. Shelters and buildings erected. This is really just making sure that people aren't putting shacks right on the road for purposes of housing, earth removal, paperwork, or whatever might be on site. Hours of operation, 8 to 4:30. Those are kind of standard. They can certainly be extended in one direction or the other. And if the board felt it was important to have longer operations in certain areas, they could designate it by zone. Maybe commercial areas have longer operations and residential areas stay to the operation when people aren't going to be most likely in their houses. Trek routes approved by the chief of police. I didn't ask the chief of police if he'd like to do that, but we could also certainly look at the DPW director or somebody who wished to do that. I mean, the chief of police may be willing to do that. Access road leading to all roadways has to be treated in some way, whether it's paved, graveled, or otherwise, to prevent dust within 200 feet of a roadway. A lot of times you'll see the scrubbers, the tire scrubbers at construction sites. They're not always 200 feet, so this sort of just extends it a little bit, gives you a little bit more prevention of kicking dust into the street. And then access roads should be at a 90-degree angle for at least 50 feet. And then on a state highway, you'd have to have a 250-foot visibility in each direction, and on other roads it'd be 150 feet. So, just kind of general standards, and then formalizing some of the surety language and making it a little bit stronger, and putting in standards for what companies will accept bonds from. And again, I take my experience with subdivisions to heart, and dealing with a random bond company in Wisconsin can be a bear. Bond companies, they're insurance companies, they don't want to pay. We've all been in car accidents and had to deal with the guy who hit you, and their insurance company is trying to prove that you did it. Bond companies are going to try and prove that the town really should probably give this guy a little bit longer to finish the project. So I like to go with AAA rated. I like to stay within the state of Massachusetts, because they're local, we can find them, they're easy to get to. I've dealt with some people who've used companies in adjacent states that I've never had a problem with, but it's up to it's up to everybody whether or not they want to be that stringent, or if they want to say, within New England or something to that effect, so they're at least regional, as opposed to, they're going and finding the best rate they can from someone who has a bonding company but maybe is a little bit harder to find. So that's the That's the quick version of the amendments, or the proposed amendments. Oh, I did add one other exemption for the development plan review. I think that sort of goes in conjunction with the other three exemptions: building permits, subdivisions, septic systems. It's another development that's being reviewed by a board that, if you're doing earth removal, you're probably going to be getting a building permit anyway, but just in that instance that you do maybe a parking lot expansion that covers development plan review and you have to do some earth removal as part of that, and I'll use Asian as an example. If they were to purchase additional land and we don't need to expand our building's great, we want to put more parking in, and they just were to do a parking lot expansion, if they needed to remove earth, without this exemption, they'd probably need one of these permits. With that exemption, they'd go through the development plan review, and theoretically, this would get covered at that point.
Questions from the board?
Just staying right on that one, whether it's a building permit, approved subdivision, or site plan development, part of the reason we're talking about this is because there was an approved subdivision, and through the cooperation between this board and the planning board, there were standards incorporated into it. So I would like to see, I don't want to have another situation that we have to have that cooperation, that either the development plan review process incorporates these standards as appropriate, or there be something that says, actually what I realized is that when we did the school, we actually theoretically should have had a gravel removal permit there because there was X amount of loam removed, but because it was part of a building permit, it theoretically wasn't. So the question I have is that I think that was done responsibly. There was a plan and everybody had advance notice. But the concern I would have is if there was another Hannaford's, Walmart type construction, that there ought to be some plan that specifically incorporates the intent of the gravel removal bylaw. And I'm not sure where that, if you can provide us where that's in development plan review. I think we were trying to make sure that since the bylaw itself said it doesn't apply to that, we really want it to apply to subdivisions when it's of a substantial nature.
Well, and I think that's what the intent of Section 10 earth removal standards. The following standards of operation shall apply to every excavation, including activities exempt from permitting, in addition to conditions imposed under subsection 8, unless otherwise permitted herein.
Great. Thank you.
So it's essentially laying out within the general bylaws these standards that apply to all earth removal, even if you don't have to go through the permitting process.
Okay. The other thing is possibly providing for the provision of a cash bond as opposed
sure,
to an actual
yeah.
bond, because I know the sewer commission went through that process. The contractor wanted to do a cash bond instead of actually purchase it.
And I think that, other security satisfactory to the special permitting, because...
Then the only other thing that was the same thing for us as the board versus the special permit granting authority is there any guidance of when we want to require a bond? And usually the bond, as you've talked about with the planning board, is to make sure that a street is completed as the subdivision as planned. The question becomes, what are we expecting the bond to do on private property of an earth removal permit?
I would expect that the bond would be generally applied in the instance of someone operating earth removal for, lack of a better word, quarrying purposes. They're looking to take the material, sell the material, and they're not actually building anything on the site. If somebody comes and, a subdivision, there's no need for a bond for a subdivision because that's covered under the subdivision control. If somebody comes to build an office park and they have to do excavation, they do a development plan review, they pull a building permit, they're going to finish that site because there's money to be made and they plan to build a building. I would say that the surety is generally going to be for executing a closure plan on a site that has no intended future use, is just for the selling or removal of earth in some manner.
I would agree with that.
Which then would bring me to my last question, which is how should this apply to existing permits that are in place now? Because technically a bylaw becomes effective when it's adopted, and therefore all of our permits now are 1 year, and then if they came in, they would be subject to this.
Right.
And
On renewal.
On
Absolutely.
renewal. So
Absolutely.
I think I support the concept of moving this to a special permit granting authority, planning board, land use director, whatever, it makes sense to do that. But I just want to make sure that we know what the impact will be and really what we want the existing developments to do, and whether there might be bonds required of some of the places at that point. I'm not proposing that at this point, I just want to talk about that. And I actually do have one other comment, is that after you finish revising this and massaging it to talk about the various things, that I'd be interested in seeing what the Conservation Commission would have for comments on this.
Sure.
You've added water recharge and other things like that, so just make sure that we have their input as well.
I think to the point of, should it apply to existing operations? I think that it's a valid point. It seems as if there's a number, 5 or 10 existing operations who continue to permit whether they're operating or not. We can certainly add some language, and I've used it in other zoning bylaws. This will be a general bylaw, but I don't think that it would be terribly different about application to existing permits or existing uses, that kind of thing, and sort of outlining what the expectations are of how this would apply upon the expiration of those permits, and that if that's something that it's felt necessary, I don't think it's out of the box or something that would be totally crazy. So I can certainly add some language like that in there.
And I'm sorry, I thought I had my last question. The other point is when you added in the language for stone crushing, and I think that has been one of the issues in the past, is that you have gravel removal and then you have sort of this separate activity that's taking that gravel or stone and grinding it, which is sort of another concern that a lot of people would have. So I think that's a good thing to have in there. The question becomes whether the language, with just making sure that the language addresses that component as well as just regular removal. I think this is a great first step, and I think that it's going to be in shape to go to town meeting. I think that this is a really good first step.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? I will say a couple of comments. So as far as one of your last comments you made about existing permits, I think one of the things we want to do is, as soon as we have something in such a format and in such a developed state, that we can distribute it to the people who have the existing permits. I don't want to put in comments and without them responding that they're needed or not. I mean, presumably we should make this so that if somebody were to come and start an earth removal process now, it should not be any different than the ones that are doing it. I mean, maybe I'm not foreseeing something that's been permitted that your changes in the regulations would not permit. And if somebody brings that to our attention, I think we should acknowledge that in language that you stated. But I don't feel we should start with that until we get their input on it already.
So let me see if I understand this correctly. What you're saying is you think that if somebody were to come in June, because let's say this goes to town meeting and passes and the Attorney General's having a good month and they get it turned around quickly, this is in place, and the person who comes in June is essentially able to operate an earth removal facility in the same manner that somebody who currently has a permit is, or goes through a similar process.
Okay, I think you're flipping it the other way around, but.
Okay, so
People
okay.
who have the process
Then I did
now.
misunderstood.
Right.
Okay, and that's fine. That's
What I'm
and
saying is that whatever the process is now that people already have permits for, the changes that we're making should not be restricting them, and if we are restricting them in a way that we don't foresee, I want them to come forward and say that, hey, listen, we've been doing this for 20 years, and
Well, but I think that's part of the reason that we would do an update is 20 years ago, operations, 20 years ago, things were different in many different ways. If we go 30 years ago, maybe not 30 years, 30 years ago, you could drink when you got out of high school, maybe if you were in high school. And that's changed. So it's, I think, kind of meeting in the middle, maybe not harming them to the point where they can't do what they're doing anymore, but also sort of bringing some compliance in. Now, I think that there can be, and sort of what I was talking about earlier with the language about how existing operations are addressed in the bylaw. If they have, if we say 100 feet is the distance that you have to keep earth removal from the road, and they're 75 or 50 feet from the road, maybe an existing operation that's currently working in that vicinity is allowed to continue, but once they cease working in that vicinity for a year, they are no longer, they're then required to abide by the 100-foot buffer. So you can, and I think, is that kind of what you're...
what I'm saying is that we should establish the bylaw the way we want it to be, and then distribute it to those people who are the current permit holders, and have them review it and say, okay, do these impact what you are already doing, and then write language that you're saying after the fact, instead of writing language preemptively.
See how it's going to affect them, and then...
Why don't we get it directly from them?
Okay.
We give them the time to review it, and I know Mr. Proctor wants to say something to this, because he is a permit holder, so if you want to come up here, just as a for instance, I'm guessing.
Certainly, one of the things that could affect one of our largest permit is the no earth or gravel shall be excavated closer to the maximum high water table than 7 feet, and then there's provision for that could be less. We have some gravel removal that goes below groundwater.
Right.
So the question becomes, what would happen then? But certainly.
Yeah, and I guess in regards to what the chairman has just brought up, when you have existing ones, how much is going to be grandfathered per se? I'm just thinking one of our biggest earth removal permits is PJ Keating. Well, their hours of operation are not from 8 till 4:30. They're from 5 o'clock in the morning till whenever. Depending on whether they're paving on Sundays and what have you. So, there's a big one. I understand the whole bond issue, but again, when you're talking about PJ Keating and putting up a bond to, in other words, if tomorrow they pulled the plug on that quarry and said, okay, we're out of here, we're not going to quarry anymore. I wouldn't want to come up with that number, what it would cost to replicate that whole area. So are you going to ask the Keating family to come up with a bond for that kind of replication? I'm a small gravel removal operation. It wouldn't be a lot of money to replicate my small operation, but there are a lot of bigger fish out there that have some, substantial sites that, again, would be a huge financial burden to them.
And that's
I just want to make sure that this process, and I understand all the process. The way you have it written with all the, the traffic studies and all that, which is what we go through every time we ask for a permit. I understand all that. But again, when it's really starting to hit the pocketbook, it's going to affect everybody in town of Lunenburg, because we mine material and we hopefully truck it to people in Lunenburg. Because if I'm doing a job up in Westminster, I truck it out of a pit up in Westminster or Templeton. So again, the financial burden is really a huge thing as far as everybody in town. So.
Right, and that's what we want to get, that input, so I mean,
Sure.
before we put in language that makes provisions about existing permits, which I think we may very well need to have, it'd be interesting to get, I guess, putting the horse before the cart. We want to get that input before we put in language.
Sure.
Because maybe we would be putting language that doesn't affect something that they don't care about, and then not addressing things that they do care about. That's all, that was my point to that.
No, and that makes sense.
I think there has to be a balance, though, between sending out a document that is fairly reflective of what you're looking to accomplish. And I would like to be able to figure out what the steps are, because if you want this on the warrant for the Springtown meeting, it would be very nice to be done this process by the end of March, so the document is in the warrant. And the end of March is not too far away. So, I mean, I think maybe, I don't know if you need a week to go through this, and if you have any other comments to send within a week, then we could do a final draft that we send out and give permit holders a couple of weeks to look at.
Well,
Can
I
ask
guess
you a
on its
question?
face,
How many permit holders do we have presently?
Maybe 10,
maybe
15.
10, right, maybe 10.
Okay.
10 different ones.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I'm more interested in getting it right than I am getting it in May. It hasn't been a huge issue. It's raised its head now, but I'm not looking to race through it just so we can get it onto May. If it goes on to special in the fall, that's fine with me. I don't think we're gonna, nobody's rushing for earth permits, earth removal permits, and we've done this particular case that came up, as Mr. Ebersol said, we worked very well with the planning board, and the proper conditions were set and the proper standards were applied, so we, until we get it done.
I was just suggesting that if the
Right.
intent was to put it on in May, what the timetable was. I mean, I think the bond issue is probably going to be a significant discussion, because I'll venture a guess that none of the permit holders are going to think there's a need for a bond. There may not be a need for the bond, but if you think there's a need for the bond, and you feel strongly about that, then we have to come up with some compromise on what that would be, because nobody that I've ever worked with on a project where a bond was required felt that there was a need for a bond.
And the reason I brought it up was that it's in the existing language that this says the board may, and I don't believe that the board ever has. And I'm a big believer in not put something in unless we know what we're going to do and how we're going to apply it, so somebody can't say, well, you did it for them and you didn't do it for somebody else. And
Right, the difference between an operation like PJ Keating, as was brought up, and somebody who's doing, like, we had somebody on Page Street, I remember a couple of years ago, did, 5 acres or something. Well, if you're doing 5 acres and there are residences on all sides and you abandon the job in the middle and you leave this big crater, and, that's where you want a performance bond, because it's really up to, if Keating's gets abandoned, which is probably highly unlikely, but nobody's living right next to them, and it's not creating this huge eyesore for people who have to drive by it every day. So I guess there are conditions that we need to apply, and maybe a may rather than a shall, depending upon the conditions of each individual request for a permit, is important. Now, the other point I had, you brought up special permits. I have a special, I have this sensitive area about special permits, because if everything's a special permit, then nothing is a special permit, then everything's just a permit. So I'd love to know why you believe that a special permit is provides an advantage to the town.
Well, the special permit, there's nothing special about a special permit. It's just the language that has been designated within the general laws. So it defines the process, the filing timelines, the recording timeline, the decision timeline, the appellate process. There's nothing in the general law just called permit. I mean, there's building permit, there's special permit, there's the subdivision control law. So calling it a special permit is really just applying the MGL for special permits to the process.
But currently, it is a permit.
Currently,
right?
It's a permit.
Okay, so
I mean,
what is the differential between that? I guess I'm trying to understand.
There's no state law that governs permit.
Okay.
I mean, I guess you could make a legal argument that what you're doing is allowable because you're passing general laws that the Attorney General is saying are legal to pass, but you have no supporting legislation through the general laws on the process that you use. It's similar to development plan review. It's a process that I would say nigh every community in the state uses. But there is no state level legislation that governs what authority you have to do that. So if you come to Lunenburg and you do a subdivision, in theory, it should be the same as if you go to Westminster, or if you go to Lowell, or if you go to Acton, or if you go to Mount Washington. You're following the same general procedure. You'll have different regulations, you'll have different standards, but the legal procedure should be the same. Not so for development plan review, site plan approval, any of the myriad names that people use for it. Because there's nothing that outlines what the requirements are. Some communities, if you get turned down for a site plan review at the planning board, your appellate is to the zoning board. Some, they write in the bylaws directly to the court system, similar to a special permit or a subdivision. Some, they don't say anything, and no one knows what happens if you get denied. So that's why I say special permit, because while it may not be special, it has legal backing behind how you do the process. So that's a long answer to a short question.
But aren't most special permits under the zoning law?
No, well, they're under the zoning law, but you can designate. I mean, the Board of Selectmen can be a special permit
Right.
granting authority.
The reason being is that should we adopt this as a zoning bylaw instead of a general bylaw?
Oh,
So then
no,
you-
I've seen special permits in general laws. I think that, where it's earth removal, I think it's okay for it to be a general bylaw. It's not.
I would agree with the chairman about the semantics can make a difference if you're trying to give better guidance for what happens if there's a dispute. Then I would like to be more clear of what it means within here, and I think that following what's similar to some of the zoning bylaw, which is it outlines what a special permit process is, what an appeals period process is, and stuff like that, and maybe that just gets all incorporated into this, just to make it so that it's one document, you can hand it to somebody.
And then we can talk about the details. The one detail that comes out at me is the expiration of a permit. I think if something, I mean, to me, just on its face, without delving into incredible analysis, is that if somebody's in compliance and nobody's complaining about and they have some kind of value in the ground that they own, and they have the permit, and they're willing to pay the permit, even though it's not doing anything, I don't understand why it would be in the interest of the town not to approve them.
And perhaps it wouldn't be. And maybe it's a matter of inactive permits may only be extended X number of times.
Well, even at that, I mean, I guess. I mean, it doesn't cost the town anything.
No, it doesn't, but I get, you get to the, I guess the question was raised, what do we do with these inactive permits? And one way is to force them to perform closure.
Well, but my point is, if they're inactive, I think they need to be, they have to not be throwing dust, and they're still, facing all the compliance of what is in the earth removal bylaw. So while they may not be permanently closed and grassed, if there's no dust blowing around and there's no sediment running, what difference does it make? What difference does it make to the town if the person holds a permit? I could buy a ticket, to use one of your analogies. I could buy a ticket to a plane and never use it, and every year I buy the same ticket. What difference does it make to anybody?
You never get to closure. If closure
Yeah.
is important.
But
you never
why?
get to-
Well, I guess what I'm asking, if we're going to change it, why is closure important? I want somebody to explain why closure is important to the town.
No, I suggest if it's important.
Right. So, anyway, but we can talk about the details, especially when we get to the number of cubic.
I was going to say, I think that's really the
That's
one
the big
thing
one,
that's going to create the most discussion. A lot of these other things, I think, we can work out fairly easily.
Sure.
It's really just it's a perspective thing. I think the cubic yards, again, is a perspective thing, but I think that's what will generate the most conversation amongst board members and specifically amongst permit holders.
And I would agree with you. And I agree with Mr. Ebersol. I think this is an excellent first step, so I thank you for that. And I think this, consolidating this in one location really makes all the sense in the world, so. And thank you for all the work thus far, so we'll continue to work.
You're welcome. Thank you for your comments.
So how would you like to proceed with this?
Have you presented this, or even, have we floated the idea to the planning board about putting this under their jurisdiction?
No.
Okay, so one of the things I would say is to, I mean, if the board is, if our board is okay with it, to ask, is something that they're okay with, and then at some point, I think we should, it's gonna, I mean, it doesn't have to be televised, we could have a workshop, you know, public workshop on the details, and just hammer through like we did our policies and procedures, where you just go paragraph by paragraph and
Okay.
come to an agreement on it.
So at what point then would you like it to be sent out to permit holders? Would you like another week or two to look at it and give additional feedback? Then we compile it and send it out to permit holders and schedule a meeting where they could come in to speak, even at a work session?
I think if we, and with Paula not being here, that we all get comments to Adam by next week, and then a final draft is done. And then I guess the question then becomes whether we would have a meeting with the planning board at that point, and try to schedule that. I know their schedule's fairly full at this point too. And then try to come up with as best a draft at that point.
Yep.
And then still be able to send it out by the end of February to,
Okay, so maybe put this back on your agenda for the first meeting in February with a final draft that has all of your comments, and then we'll talk about
Yep.
how we're going to move forward.
Okay.
Well, and then and if we can try to get a workshop with the planning board already, you know, after that, so sometime, you know,
Yeah.
we can try to schedule that for, I don't know, mid-February. And if we can get all that done, so our comments comes back to this board, and like you said, our first meeting in February, then we have the workshop, talk about it jointly, and then send it out. I think that'd be great.
Okay, so send it out to the permit holders after
After the-
you have
after
the
the
joint
workshop,
workshop. Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you, Adam.
Update and status of FY 2015 goals from the Board of Selectmen and the Town Manager.
Okay, so I have to apologize, I do not have anything for you this evening on an update on my goals.
do you,
And
you think, you got it down on the proposed agenda for next week?
Yes, I
Okay,
do, again,
great.
yeah.
minutes,
There are no minutes yet.
warrants,
This is accounts payable.
accounts payable in the amount of $685,756.79.
This is payroll.
Payroll in the amount of $637,428.09.
Payroll deduction.
And payroll deduction warrant in the amount of $502,927.18. Action file issues.
One item, just, we talked about this a while ago. I believe that the charter requires that we review our bylaws on the years that it ends in a 5. So, that being this year, I was also following up on the town clerk's progress on the codification of the existing bylaws, where we were with that, which would then give us the basis that would work on the other items.
trying to think, it says every 10 years, or, doesn't it say that?
I think it does say,
Just want to bylaw review.
it's every 10 years for the charter from when it was last done, but I think
Oh,
this...
the bylaws, okay, I'm sorry.
Bylaws,
All right,
right.
Yeah, we would have done it in 2010.
okay.
So we need a bylaw review committee.
We do.
Okay.
Speaking about committees, I should take this time to say that we still have an opening on the FinCom. So if you are interested in serving on the Finance Committee, this is the heated time. This is the exciting time. So you can fill out a talent bank form, either download one from online from the town website or get one from town clerk or town hall. And also, we still have 2 vacancies on the Public Access Cable Committee. So again, if you're looking to work with guiding our cable television process and working with establishing what kinds of programming should be on, how people can air that programming, that would be excellent. Any other action file issues? Committee reports, Board of Health,
No report?
Building Reuse,
No report.
Capital Planning,
Capital Planning Committee met this afternoon prior to this meeting. We finished our prioritization of the requests. We're working a few details on some of those requests, and we'll present to the FinCom on January 22nd. We also agreed to continue as a committee beyond the budget season to work to formulate a 5 to 10 year comprehensive project for capital that may include borrowing as a proposal to the town, to the FinCom and to this board.
excellent. Finance Committee,
They met January 8th. They received the report of the audit of the finances for fiscal year 2014. It was a very good report on that audit. No deficiencies were found or reported, and it just kind of underlined the fact that all the town financial departments are doing an excellent job on following their procedures and meeting their deadlines.
excellent. And so take the opportunity to say kudos to the town manager and the finance director and all the people who work on those staffs for continuing a great job, and those reports have been excellent over the years, so thank you.
It really was an outstanding report.
And then that then flows directly into our bond rating as well.
Library Board of Trustees,
They're meeting on Thursday.
MPO and Planning Board,
MPO's meeting tomorrow.
okay, and Planning Board, unless somebody is going to report for Paula.
I was at the planning board meeting. They went over the final details for the village district bylaw, and they're going to be publicizing a meeting for the public to come and have additional information on it, and I believe that's the 26th.
Is this an official public hearing or not the official public hearing yet?
Not official public
Okay.
hearing, but official
A hearing
Hearing.
during
Hearing
their
process.
report,
Right.
okay, during their meeting, okay.
small H hearing.
Okay. PAC,
They are meeting next week.
okay. School Committee,
The school committee met last week. The superintendent presented her FY16 budget of $17,775,000 budget. The target was 3.5%. As presented, it is at 6.09% and $1 million over the current fiscal budget. Included in the personnel budget were 2 teachers to address the overcrowding in grades 4 and 6. It was reported that there's over 130 students in those grades. Excluded was a request for 5 paraprofessionals at the primary and Turkey Hill middle schools. The school committee chair asked the super to put the 5 paras back into the budget. During public comment, I supported the addition of the 2 teachers because in my experience teaching, keeping classrooms at a manageable size really benefits all learners. And I feel that that's where the schools get the most bang for their buck. An illustration of the proposed boundaries for the TC Passios and Brooks House was presented. Damon McQuaid, who's on the planning board and the reuse committee, speaking on behalf of himself as a resident, urged the school to widen the boundary around Passios to accommodate multiple uses and the parking that multiple uses would require. I received an email on Thursday from a school committee chair informing that based on that discussion, the illustration is being redrawn to include a larger area showing the boundary of the school property to the north of TCP. So they're planning to redraw it to enlarge one area. During the school building committee report, Mr. Mackin mentioned that if the funds were available from the school building project, TC Passios could be demolished when the current high school building is demolished. It was also reported that the asbestos abatement request of $34,000 received a low priority rating from the Capital Planning Committee. Mr. Londa suggested that the school system proceed with the abatement at Turkey Hill to enable the relocation of administrative offices there, and to wait on further abatement unless capital planning is able to award more money. And they are going to be meeting a week from tomorrow.
Thank you. School Building Committee, so I was going to report exactly what Mrs. Luck did about the preliminary boundaries as presented by the school committee, and the School Building Committee meets tomorrow night at 6:30 at TC Passios. Sewer Commission.
Sewer Commission is meeting tonight.
Okay. Town Manager reports.
I don't have anything.
The town manager emailed us a chart that reflects contrast in state spending from 2000 to comparing 2000 to 2015 in major areas of state spending. I thought it was interesting, by the way. I'm assuming you all received it and looked at it. How some things like healthcare has gone from 21% of their budget to 38% of the state spending, where human services has gone down 4%, elementary and secondary education has gone down 5%. So those are the large changes. There were 1 or 2% differences in some other things, but those are the major three categories, just in how the changing state budget is going. Also, we got word from the state that as one of his first acts as governor, Governor Baker released the last $100 million in the Chapter 90 funding, which equates to approximately $210,000 for us? $220,000 for road and pavement services, repaving and all the other pavement management services that are covered under our plan. So that was good news. I don't know how that news is going to be parlayed into the already $500 million deficit at the state level, but I guess there's always a cost to campaign promises. In this case, we're the recipients, and we'll see when FY16 happens whether that was a good thing or not. So, but right now it's good. No interviews, no executive session. Next meeting is next Tuesday, January 20th, right here at 7 o'clock. We can. So on January 27th, we are planning a board and committee appreciation social.
So I just wanted to confirm, I know a couple of you had mentioned an interest in doing something like this. I had suggested the 27th because that is an off week for you. This room may not be available because the Sewer Commission usually uses it on that Tuesday, although I think they may move. If you would like to have it here, we could have it over at the Ritter. But I just wanted to confirm that that date works, or if you want to move to another date, because I need to get invitations out to people.
Well, that date is fine with me.
Yep, date is fine.
And we also, if we need space, we also could check to see if the large room
At the
library
library,
is
yeah.
available
Yeah.
too. So, and if they're having a nice art show right now, I don't know what they're showing, if they're showing any artwork over there, they generally are. So that would be a good alternative if we can't get this room.
That probably is a nicer alternative.
Yeah,
So,
right.
a 6 to 7, is that, or 6 to
6 to
7?
8, 6 to 7:30.
6 to
Yeah, I mean,
7:30.
it'd be great.
Okay, so I will confirm the location, and then we'll get invitations
And
out
just
to everybody.
so people understand what we're talking about is basically, it would be, we talked about this during some of our board appointments, especially to the Conservation Commission, and then when we were reviewing our appointing committee, that it would be a good time to thank people serving on appointed and elected, well, mainly appointed, but also elected boards, committees, and commissions. And for people who may be interested in those, to meet people in those boards and commissions as well. So it really will serve as two potential purposes, but really just to thank people for the many hours that many of their boards, commissions, and committees put in every year. So that'd be January 27th, Tuesday.
And next Tuesday, we're having a workshop at 6 also, right?
Yes.
What's the workshop on?
Mart.
Oh,
People
right,
from
okay,
Mart are
right,
coming.
okay. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further business, I would entertain a motion.
Move that we adjourn.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Good night, everyone. See you next week. Okay, we have to
Jamie,
continue the signing ceremony.